for joining the session of today. Well, if you have any question during the time of this live, please you can put your comments in the box that for the comments and questions, and I will come back to it at the end for Ale and Jess to reply. And Jess and Ale, do you want to maybe start with introducing a little bit yourself and telling us what's the role of Forge for Humanity?
Yeah, hi everyone. So to give a bit of background, Ale and I have been in Greece for the last 5 years. We started off in the port of Piraeus, where there was an unofficial camp for everybody that was coming from the Aegean Islands. And then after that, we moved to an accommodation center north of Athens, where we were working with the residents of that community. And it was there that we saw a huge gap in the services being offered to the residents, which was the lack of support and really no attention paid to the solo men that were there. And there was talk of the camp closing, and there was no real conversation about what was going to happen to the single men that were there, while there was lots of talk about the families being moved to accommodation and those kind of things. So at that time, we decided to set up a project and move to Athens, which would support specifically the solo male population. And we set up an office in March of 2018. And since then, we've slowly developed that into the go-to spot for information for solo men. So that's what Forge for Humanity does.
Okay, so you already answered a little bit my second question, where I wanted to ask you, indeed, what's the focus of Forge for Humanity, and what is the group that you focus the most on, and for which reason? But you already answered a little bit that, but if you want to maybe go deeper in that.
Yeah, so we decided to focus on, I just realized I'm not actually on the camera. We decided to focus on this group because we saw that there were, the issues that they were experiencing were twofold. They were all individually experiencing the single male tag, which was having really negative influences on their self-esteem and their ability to kind of build a future. And then we also saw their deprioritization as a group, which meant that they did not have the same access to housing or basic needs coverage, mental health support, and legal advice that other demographics in the refugee population do have. And they, because of these things, they experience much higher levels of social exclusion, and they are left in the camps for longer, which means that they go on to experience the detrimental effects of institutionalization. And this can also cause a lot of antisocial behavior. And they also are the group that have the most immediate chance to have a positive, what am I trying to say, Ale?
So basically, we came to realize that a system that is based on vulnerability is not quite sustainable, because if you're only giving resources and opportunities to people that are tagged as vulnerable, so who is going to be bringing something back to this system? You cannot just take resources and take with nobody kind of closing the circle. So we realized that the men that we work with are actually the people that are better equipped to be fruitful and meaningful members of any society. So there needed to be a space for these men to bring out all of this potential and raise above all of this system, basically.
All right. So I understand well that what you really want to do is also focus on helping them to build their future, to build the continuity of their life when they arrive to Greece. And if I can ask you, like, what do you perceive as the most important needs of the men, the single men that you're focused on and that you're helping?
So, I mean, the biggest thing is and always has been housing. Solo men are the majority of rough sleepers, and the housing, they are usually in crowded apartments that are, for the most part, illegal, and or they're in camps. And so housing is where the deprioritization that we talk about really reaches its worst, because if they can't access safe, adequate accommodation, then they don't have a platform or like a foundation that they can actually build. So that's the number one priority.
We also consider very important the mental health part. We think that governments or institutions should start investing more on mental health, because there are lots of mental health issues going on. And if the governments don't start putting like some resources into it, like spaces and more professionals, so we are talking about 2 or 3 generations of people that are gonna basically have their mental health severely affected for the rest of their future if the governments don't start. The other part, that it's also corresponding to governments and institutions or whoever authorities should be in charge of this, is like finding a way to validate credentials and qualifications for people, because so many people have them, so many people have skills, and there is no legal way for them to put them in place or to use them in here. So a person that already had a career before cannot use it. It's just wasted. So it is such a shame, both for like hosting countries and for the people itself, to have this waste. One, because starting a whole professional career for somebody, and second, for the countries, because you're not using such a huge amount of resources that you have there in your hands. So we think there should be like more policies towards this more long-term investment, so you can build a country with everybody involved in it, not only just leaving them there, like if they couldn't contribute anything, you know. So basically, there needs to be some creation of legal pathways for people to be able to use all of the abilities and knowledge that they have.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really hear you with the two most thing that you mentioned about recognizing talents. I think it's very important, and for also mental health issues. And that's where I wanted to also drop a line about yoga and sport with refugees, and tell that this is two issues that we try to tackle as well, where we try to give skills and empower people with giving them leadership roles, to be coordinators, to be the teachers of the sports programs. And we also tackle mental health issues of a lot of single men that don't find a group or a community where they could really have a better feeling, and feeling like empowered, stronger, and feeling happy every day. So it's also like what we are really focusing on, and also for a lot of single men and a lot of unaccompanied minors as well. Also for a lot of women, we try to empower them and make them feel stronger. And this is really something that I completely agree with you, Jess and Ale, that a lot of institutions lack in doing, and putting together programs that can allow people to have their skills and their talents more recognized from the country of origins that they are from. With that, I want to go for the fourth question for you to know a little bit because COVID restriction has been impacting yoga and sport a lot, but how is it impacting you as an organization and for also single men living in Athens?
Yeah. I mean, I really want to focus on the ways that it's affected the people that we work with more than for us, because for us, it's meant that we are currently working online, and that's what has changed for us. But, you know, there are obviously the very obvious problem, COVID restrictions, which are that, you know, the sanitary conditions in the camps mean that it is very difficult to do what we're all being told to do, which is to wash your hands and stay safe. You know, there's no ability to socially distance in the camps. There certainly isn't in places where people are living 20 people in 3 rooms. And for the people that are actually living on the street, there is no way for them to stay at home, right? And they can't afford to buy masks in the same way that you know most people are able to. And these are all of the obvious things that everybody talks about. But there's also some more like invisible consequences. You know, for most of the last year, the camps have been in some sort of lockdown, which means that they are more isolated than they were, even if they were isolated before. That's now been, and again, compounded by the fact that organizations don't have the same access to the camps because of their own COVID restrictions, so they're not able to provide the activities that they were before. And then another issue is the access to the asylum service, and renewing people's documents or not renewing people's documents for a year now has meant that they can't access employment, they can't access public services in the same way, because they're always asking, well, why have your papers expired? And there isn't coordination between all of these different bureaucratic in Greece. And we actually know people that have lost their jobs because their employers are worried that they are no longer legal in the country just by looking at their documents. People that don't have access to the money that they've actually earned in their bank account, because the banks are saying if you don't have a valid ID, then you can't access money. And in general, you know, it's made access to employment, medical care, all of these things much more difficult. And these are not just problems that are problems that every single asylum seeker and refugee are experiencing at the moment. But for solo men, because they already had such poor access to these services, it has made it even worse for them specifically. And the last thing I think is that solo men specifically are more targeted by the police anyway. And so now that the police are on the streets and they are policing people in terms of COVID regulations, the ones that police the most and targeted for fines for like not wearing your mask properly or being out when you shouldn't be, they are the ones that are receiving the fines and being targeted and taken to the police station, despite the fact that all of these restrictions are like a lot of the time confusing or conflicted, and they're also not translated. So yes, maybe after a year there is understanding of the problems, but you know, because it's so confusing and people are not kept updated, it means that it's a huge problem for them.
And with that said, how do you see people coping with mental health issues? How is it for, like, what are some solutions that can be brought in terms of mental health?
Well, I don't think we can exactly talk about coping mechanisms because the access to mental health resources is so poor that I don't think that we can actually say that there is such thing as a proper coping mechanism. We are living actually a mental health crisis. We are working with a population in which disorders are extremely prevalent, and a population that we love to say like how like trauma it's already finished, this post-traumatic thing, when it's actually not true. Like these people experience trauma every day. It is not over. It didn't finish when they arrived into Europe, basically. It continues. Like upon arrival, they lose all of their rights. They lose personal roles. They are socially excluded. They experience culture blaming. They experience racism. Besides all of this, when they are actually living in here, they experience all of this bureaucratic violence because the systems are not meant to help them actually. On the other hand, specifically talking about men, they, I think, a bit more than everybody else in terms of mental health. One, because they are not supposed to. They always have to oppress their emotions and like be strong and like be men and be the provider of the family. And emotions are not good. You cannot show them. This also means that they access less to the very few resources that are. They are less inclined to go to look for help. So that's also such a negative consequence for that. Another part that I think adds pressure to men is that there are higher expectations of them. Like they always have to like over justify why they are here. Whilst populations maybe do not get questioned that much. Like, why are you here? Why do you need to be here? Men do always have to over justify and like show why they are worthy to be here more than other populations. So all of these together for men mean that they experience very prevalently disorders and mental health issues. Together with that, a problem is that there is no resources to fight this. There is very, very, very little teams dedicated to mental health. And if we talk again about how these men have less access than other populations, so when you try to access a service, these men are always going to be given less of a chance. So all of these mental health issues that are brewing and raising at the moment cannot be fight because there is no resource to help them to fight it. And the last part, and I think this is a bigger conversation, and maybe for another day, but there is such a problem in inclusion in psychology and psychiatry in general, because those are two fields that are extremely westernized. Therapies are not culturally inclusive. Theories are not cultural. So the way that we see mental health and that try to apply upon other people, it's actually not practical because it doesn't suit them the same way that it suits white people, because it was meant to be for white people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that made completely sense. Thank you a lot. And it's a very tough subject, I think, and very it's very hard to tackle this and to try to find solutions, even though the situation is very hard for people, and to find solutions to feel good. But how do you keep your positivity in that regard? Like, what do you do to, or what do the people that you're working with, what do they do to keep being positive?
Well, in the beginning, in the end of the first lockdown last year, we went back to work and we reopened the office and tried to keep things normal. Very soon we realized that that was not possible because of our, like the size of our space and how we work. It was very difficult for us to keep everybody safe while we were working. So we had to close again until we thought that the situation was going to be safer for everybody. After a few months of this situation, we realized that it was going to probably take a few months for happening. So we basically had to sit down and talk about how we were going to do this from now on. How were we going to times? We realized that working from home was working. We were doing what we are meant to do. The people were having access to the service. They were getting the information. But we have lost a very important part of what we do, which is like the community that we had built with all of these men. So we realized that for this to keep working and to keep having the essence that it had before, we needed to find a way to bring that community again. In this case, of course, the only way to do it was doing it online because we are living in Athens. So we've had in our to-do list for a while the idea of creating a Facebook community group. So we thought that this was the ideal time to do it.
Yeah, so we've started this online Facebook group, which is specifically for not necessarily the people that we've worked with previously, but people that we've worked with in the office, and then anybody else who also happens to be a solo man, refugee, asylum seeker, migrant in Greece. And, you know, in that group, we want to be able to give people the information that they maybe are not getting translated about COVID restrictions and the general situation, or like information about the vaccine, all of these things, but also for them to have a space that they can talk to each other online about things that they might need in the way that they would in the office. And so make connections between each other, you know, like I'm looking for a house, I need or I'm looking for a roommate, or, oh, I don't have anybody to go with me to an appointment to translate. And then there are obviously at the moment quite a few guys in the group that are able to do that, and a lot of people have a lot of spare time at the moment. So that's why we've created that and what we're doing, and we launched it 2 weeks ago, and even in that amount of time, I think we have also started to feel like there is more connection again with the people that we're working with. So we really hope that it's going to become something that we can use as a resource, whether or not we're, you know, even when we're back in the office, I think that it can continue to be something that is a good resource for solo men.
And is it in every language? Is it available in every language now, or?
We like the kind of description of the group and the like vital things are in every language. And what we will try to do over time is to build up within the community people that will translate what is happening in the group, so that it's an interactive thing instead of it's just being us feeding information, because that's never something we wanted to do. We've always wanted it to be like a really like interactive process, and something that we really focus on is getting the guys to do things for themselves and use their own voice rather than just being given the information or given the handouts.
Well, that's really cool. I'm super glad to hear that you started this. I think it's a very good initiative.
The information is right now in, just so that people know when they're going to access it, in Farsi, Pashto, Urdu, French, Turkish, and English.
Yeah.
Well, that's
so
quite a lot already.
Arabic, sorry.
And Arabic.
So those are the languages that we're going to try to get as much information out with in, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just a random question, but what can people do at home? Like, what can they do from their home if you want to give them an advice also?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, right? Because obviously it's all like the easy answer is to be like donate, or like when the lockdown's over, like come and volunteer. But actually, one of the things that we've talked a lot about, and it's been something that's actually really important to us since we started Forward, was like the language that we use when we're speaking about our participants, or generally about the situation for asylum seekers and refugees in Greece. And actually it's something that you have also like prioritized now as well, with like changing the name of Yoga and Sport with Refugees, which is awesome. So I think one of the things that we can do, which is really important, is to help to change the narrative surrounding asylum seekers and refugees. Is like, this is why in most of the stuff that we put out, you will not see the word refugee or migrant used a lot, and you won't see like negative images of the people that we work with, or people in like distressing situations. So it really is one of the things that we want to focus on, which is that people at home can help to change this negative narrative surrounding refugees by responding to positive fundraising tactics, positive journalism, instead of focusing on media that depicts the poor, helpless refugee.
I completely agree with you.
Sorry?
No, I say I completely agree with you. It's more than time to change this image, because it's not a true image, really. People are very talented.
Yeah. And we really think that it makes a difference, like it makes a difference to the community itself, because they're more able to not feel that prejudice against them, and therefore able to be more independent. Like, they're not labeled already as being helpless, and so then they don't automatically feel that, right? And then also for the discrimination and the negative way that migrants and refugees are talked about, which is fueling a really negative image of that population in Europe and, frankly, the world.
Well, thank you.
And that's
Thank you for explaining this. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's really, really great. And I'm super happy that we have this live. I think we went quite a bit over time already. So, and I don't see any question popping up or any comments. So if there is later, feel free to answer, or I can also answer. But I was really glad to to see you guys and to have this interview with you. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. I hope everyone enjoyed this live also, and I hope to be at the next live on the 4th of April. I think there is another live with Donate for Refugees, so put it in your agenda. And for me, that's all. Thank you very much for being there. If you have a last word, Ale and Jess, maybe.
Just thank you very much for doing this with us. It's been a really great opportunity to actually talk about something which is not talked about very often. So thank you to you, and thank you to Donate for Refugees.
Thank you.